Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley. I'm your second host, Blake Osborne, and we're glad to have you. And ladies and gentlemen, here's Alan Mosley.
Vice host.
Vice host.
Does that work?
Vice host? Is that like vice president?
Assistant host.
Now I'm popping my collar, man.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm just gonna kill the illusion right off the bat. You changed your shirt to make it look like
you have to do that.
Yeah, I know.
Come on.
We're filming like this is. I know Craig Ferguson did this on his last show of the Late Show with Craig Ferguson.
Well, if he did it, we can justify
I'm just gonna say this real quick. Is that he did this funny little thing where he said, you know how when you watch on TV, like you watch Game of Thrones and they're out there, like that's not happening right then.
No.
That happened months ago. So these actually. We may do live shows here pretty soon.
Yeah,
I'd love to do that.
It's possible.
But this is actually recorded, and it's on the same day as as last week's episode.
Right.
And so the point being is I don't actually live here and not change clothes.
Gotcha.
And so I have to cover for myself.
Either that or you're wearing a uniform and you're going to wear exactly the same thing every single time,
Yes.
which I'm pretty sure we're not going to do that.
Yeah, we're not going to do that. So this is episode 3 of the Gold Standard with Alan Mosley, and I am your host, Alan Mosley. And today's episode is going to be a little bit more somber, a little bit more serious episode than the last 2 that we've done. And I wanted to save these topics for their own episode. Back during my little hiatus down in Florida was the mass shooting in Las Vegas.
Right.
Of course, I'm sure most people have the meat of the details by now. Is a gentleman named Stephen Paddock, who was on the 32nd or 37th
I think it was the 37th
of
floor,
the Mandalay Bay, and there was a concert going on across the way there that Jason Aldean, it was a country concert, and this guy checks into the hotel some number of days prior. Goes up there with a small artillery. He's what was it? 10 rifles?
A lot more than that, man. It was just a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and he's got a vantage point of the outdoor concert. I'm assuming he blows out the window.
Yeah.
He rains down fire. The account, as I have heard it from a variety of sources, is. So he's shooting down on the crowd. He's got an array of semi-automatic weapons, and we're not going to get into the bump stock and all that nonsense.
No, everybody's already been there.
Yeah,
so.
We're not doing that. So he's firing down on the crowd. There was a security guard supposedly named Jesus Campos who had gone up to the floor, had either confronted him or was on the hallway. Supposedly he had some sort of camera set up that he could see people coming onto the floor. He fired at the guard. I don't know if he actually hit the guard or not. Yeah. And then he's able to rain down some hate on the crowd there for a little while before eventually the police respond, and I guess it was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. When the police were coming in, he took his own life.
Yeah.
Which
is so often the case in these scenarios where you have these people that do these things, rather than facing the music for what they've done, they typically end themselves.
Yeah. I should have brought it up here because I didn't really want to talk a ton about the already reported details, but more just about the topic in general. But I didn't actually see on here what the final count was of the dead and wounded.
Right.
Do you remember what that was off the top of your head?
I don't.
It was bad.
It was bad.
It was really bad. That is the worst mass shooting in modern history. And even with the events of this past weekend that we'll get into later, this one's still the worst.
It was one of the worst in the nation. Yeah.
So that's kind of like a couple of minute overview of what happened, and there's a lot of different issues to talk about there, but a few things that I kind of wanted to get off my chest about it is, of course it's terrible. Of course we grieve for those that are affected by it, and it's awful. And if people who know me already know this, I'll go, I'm not a big thoughts and prayers guy because that doesn't do anything. I'm not a big thoughts and prayers guy. If you genuinely felt just sick to your stomach for the people that are affected by it, you would figure out ways to donate to those people to help them in some physical way or monetarily or just, whatever you could do to help those people. If they're friends or relatives of yours, I know you're going to be there for them. But kind of where I stand at it. So it was October 1st is when it happened. I guess since it's kind of made its way through the mainstream media and it's out the other end now.
Right, and you're not really hearing much about it.
Yeah,
anymore.
you're not hearing a lot
of focusing more on the current.
Yeah,
current.
Well,
slaughter in Texas.
If it bleeds, it leads. It's how it is. Mm-hmm. But I guess one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this today, we didn't get a chance to because I was out of town and I did want to discuss it, but for a few different reasons. The first being exactly that. Let's just go ahead and jump on the front end and work our way back.
Sure.
Which is, this is totally out of the news now.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just totally out of the news. It's gone.
It's gone. Yeah. I can't remember now how long it's been since I heard any mainstream source
It's been a month. It's been a month since it happened.
Yeah.
Okay, grant you, but still, it's such a big thing for it to be completely out of the news.
So it's the biggest mass shooting in
modern
US
times.
In modern times. Right. It's so significant, and I guess for me, and look, I understand that news is about ratings. I understand that lots have happened since then, and I understand the news moves on. I get that. But I guess what troubles me about it is this is one of those instances where there's so much left unanswered.
Right.
That I just have a hard time kind of nailing down how I feel about anything that happens, whether it's something terrible like this or whether it's something a bit more lighthearted than this, that it just sort of seems to me that when a story is really cut and dry and the facts are very plain and simple and everything has been totally turned over to the public for review.
Everything seems to fit into place absolutely perfectly like little dominoes.
Then
something seems off.
When that story goes from one to the next and we move on to another story, you don't think a lot about it.
Yeah.
But this was not one of those.
No,
this was not one of those at all. This was a situation where I mentioned really briefly the security guard, Jesus Campos. That guy disappeared there for a while. I remember that was really big in the news for a time. I think he ended up doing an appearance on the Ellen Show, which I don't know how the Ellen Show is really like the journalistic powerhouse of our times, where that's where you go to answer questions.
Hey, you do get to dance on it though,
Yeah, and I'm not like, that's not a knock on Ellen DeGeneres at all. I'm just saying that's like you have a nation that's somewhere in between mourning and anger, but lots of confusion,
right? And then there's lighthearted,
and then you would just think that you would have more people with some semblance of authority on the issue that would be coming out and giving more information to the public, saying, all right, this is where we're at. Okay, this is what we know, and look, there'll be plenty of opportunities for me to bash authority figures and police and investigators. I'm not trying to do that. Right. All I'm really trying, and look, mistakes happen. Sometimes people jump the gun. Maybe there's a miscommunication with a PR person or what have you. But we just know that the quote unquote official story evolved is a very politically correct way of putting it. That is changed is a more accurate way of putting it.
So what were the things that you specifically noticed that really kind of made you feel that way about it?
Well, it's just, I'll just say real quick, I'm always reminded when it comes to, conspiracy and the unknown and things like that, especially anything that involves government involvement of any kind. Yeah. I'm always reminded by something that Ron Paul said back when he was running for president. He was running for president, right? Which means that on some level, you can't just go out there making wild conspiracy claims left and right because you're wanting to be viewed as a legitimate candidate. And so his very, what I thought was an eloquent way of putting it was, I'm not supporting any particular conspiracy theory, but what I am saying is that when you have authority figures who get caught in lie after mistruth, after misspoke. That's a I misspoke about this. When you know that there's lies and deception, and when you know things are not turned over to the public for review, that breeds conspiracy.
Yeah.
Conspiracies are cooked up because facts do not come to light
or don't necessarily line up.
Yeah, because explanations are not fulfilling.
Right. I noticed a couple of things.
Yeah.
I noticed a couple of things that kind of caught me off guard. There was video, and it was all over the internet for the longest time, for about 2 weeks. It's gone. You can't even find it. Where some folks with their cell phones had taken video of a second window several floors down from the top window that appeared to have been cracked open, and there appeared to be gunfire coming from that window as well. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but that's an example of what we're talking about. There's just some holes that don't line up. I mean,
what the crazy thing is about independent video, or the crazy thing about having having different experts who are giving your opinion on the sound as it pertains to gunfire, or as it pertains to the acoustics of the area and all that, is that you can so easily find one expert to say that what the official narrative is, that's 100%.
Yeah.
And you could easily find an expert to say that's hogwash. There's 18 shooters at the grassy knoll.
Just like the grassy knoll, just like 9/11, just like everything.
And so, I think the polite way of saying that is just simply is that you have differences of opinion, and facts are scarce.
Right.
And when the people who are supposedly the authorities are light on details and their story changes a few times, there may be absolutely nothing nefarious to that whatsoever.
Right.
But you can just understand as an objective person that you can see where that breeds
the conspiracy theorists.
You can see that. And so there's the cell phone footage. I know that there was various people that were texting and on Twitter that were saying, we just hid in such and such place. People swearing up and down they saw other shooters on the ground. People saying they heard gunshots from different directions. And of course, you can explain things. You can say that, well, there's hysteria, people are panicking. Maybe they're not in the best position to be making expert testimony. And look, I get it both ways. I can get one person saying, no, I'm not crazy. I'm telling you, I know what I heard and what I saw. And I can also understand the not excitements necessarily, the panic and everything that's going on.
Right. The fray.
But now that we're removed from just the event itself a little bit, so of course this gentleman, and I'm only going to, Stephen Paddock was his name. That'll be the last time I say his name, because if there's one thing we're going to do is we're not going to show a whole bunch of footage or pictures, because we're not glorifying murderers.
Any of this, no,
never.
Right.
He was a shady fellow, is probably putting it lightly.
Yeah.
I had heard that at one time he did have some sort of dealings with government or the Defense Department or something like that, or maybe that's untrue, or maybe he's retired from that. There was some reports that he was in real estate, which may very well be true. There was some reports that he was basically like a professional gambler.
That he made a big gambling problem.
But that he made a lot of money from gambling. Which that you can. There are skilled guys out there. There are skilled guys out there that can play the cards and make some money.
Right.
Maybe so, but once again, you can understand the unknown and the confusion there, that you have this guy that kind of has this sort of varied background that seems to be shady. Well off. It's definitely shady. I mean I've done different things in my relatively short life. So people do different things and move on to different chapters of their lives. That shouldn't just be an indictment right in of itself.
Yeah.
But it's one layer. It's one layer of the onion. So you have this guy with this varied background who, by all accounts, was quiet, wasn't overwhelmingly politically active or involved in any way, that didn't I mean it wasn't exactly like a hermit, but didn't just have a ton of friends or family hanging around.
Right.
But those that didn't really identify him as a crazy person or an angry individual necessarily. He was a guy of means. He had money. They talked about,
apparently had a lot of guns.
Yeah, he had a lot of guns, even though people that knew him best said they never knew he knew anything about guns.
Right. Apparently he knew everything.
And he
about
knew
guns.
everything. Yeah.
Right. Well, here's something to think about.
Okay.
Here's something to think about. Okay, so when this first happened, one of the things I put out there was, okay, so here's this guy. And I don't know the exact number, but let's put it this way. You're not going to bring that number of guns up to the 37th floor of a building in any conspicuous way. Now, listen, if you're working at a hotel and there's a guest and he's up on the 37th floor, God knows what have you, and is constantly moving stuff, he's constantly bringing suitcases. I don't care if they're Louis Vuitton. Okay, something's weird going on when dude is constantly bringing suitcases into the room and never coming out with them. Somebody just was completely blind.
And I've heard people say that, well, of course, the rifles could be disassembled. If he's a big time, high rolling paying customer, they're not getting in his business. And I get that, but you are correct in that there's lots of people calling for, well, let's see the security cam footage. I just want to see it happening.
Be carrying luggage every day. He's carrying 4 or 5 bags there's something weird there.
Yeah, let's see the footage and let's hear some interview from some bellhop, some check-in person.
But you're not getting any of that.
You're not getting any of it. And I'm not saying that the Mandalay Bay Hotel is required to put their employees up on a podium to have them give a speech. I'm not saying that.
No, they're not.
But I'm just, once again, it's just another layer. It's just another layer of the onion that if you don't want people crying foul, then you just present more facts.
Right.
And when you're reluctant to, people will automatically be skeptical.
Okay, so let's get down a layer.
Okay.
Let's get down under the top couple of layers that are the obvious. Let's talk about what I believe is the underlying thing to a lot of this, mental health.
Okay.
And, and you and I talked about this a little bit before the show, and sometimes we have some really in-depth conversations, him and I.
Well, hold on just a second.
Yeah.
I want to talk about both shootings because we're definitely going to talk about guns and we're definitely going to talk about mental health.
Okay.
Because to say that a calm and committed individual with absolutely no mental health issues
that we
can just decide to commit that sort of action is ridiculous.
Yeah.
You have to be a disturbed individual or you have to be a combatant fighting foes.
Sure.
Because normal people without mental deficiencies who do not see themselves as a combatant fighting enemies does not do what he did.
Right.
It just does. That doesn't happen.
Isn't delusional or has some other
exactly. Or it's a mental health issue.
Mental health issue.
But just to wrap up the Las Vegas point really quick, and then we'll talk about this past weekend, is that, of course, then you heard about his wire transfers of money and his girlfriend who's like in the Philippines or something. And he
supposedly sent her over there to protect her from this.
And he had wired her some money. And it's just, and like I said, and then more recently, the last thing I saw in the news, because we were talking about how this has just disappeared from the news.
Yeah.
The last thing I saw in the news was that his house got broken into.
Yeah, that's right. I saw that too.
His house. There was a few different things. One was the computers that he supposedly had, some hard drives are missing.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah.
Once again, I can have a computer and I can just happen to decide today I'm going to switch the hard drive out, and then I can go have a car accident, and then you can come here. I wonder why he took the hard drive out, and you don't know because I'm not here.
Right.
That could happen.
Yeah.
But once again, that's just another layer that just seems suspicious.
Fishy.
So you've got some missing hard drives on his computers, which, boy, wouldn't we like to see what's on those about now.
I'd like to know his Google history.
Yeah. And then his house gets broken into, which you would think, I mean, it's not exactly like it's Fort Knox, but you would think it would be a little difficult for you or I to go waltzing into Lee Harvey Oswald's apartment to go looking for stuff.
I mean, there had to be like police tape and seals on the doors and stuff. I mean, so this just screams some kind of blunder, something being covered up.
And then did you see in the news, the last thing I heard in the news was his brother was being arrested for child pornography.
Possession of child porn, that's right.
And maybe that's true, but once again, I just when
he was the first person to go on camera and talk about his brother, wasn't he?
When you happen to have one guy who sort of kind of openly questions the narrative a little bit too loudly, and all of a sudden they find child pornography on his computer. All of a sudden he just happens to be a part of it.
Maybe we know what happened to the other guy's hard drives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and once again, that's the funny thing about conspiracy is that could there be a logical explanation for all of these things? There absolutely could.
And there is.
But when you don't present one that has even a shred of logical sense, and then more and more time goes by, and all of a sudden the case gets more and more hush-hush.
Just expect people to forget it.
Yeah, and we've moved on in the media cycle. That's going to breed more conspiracy and, frankly, breed more contempt for authorities because for what people see as you're not giving us the truth.
Right. It's like, how can we trust the authority when they're not telling us the truth and we know they're not?
And so to wrap up just the Las Vegas incident, so the man's dead.
Yeah.
We will never be able to ask him what he did and why because he's dead.
Right.
Evidence is missing. Evidence is scarce. The stories have changed. People involved in the case have either totally disappeared from the face of the earth, or at the very least, sure as heck aren't inviting themselves to give any public statements, or are being arrested for child pornography. And so the add up to all of those things, I mean, it's kind of like when you look at our court system, is that you're not supposed to be able to be arrested and convicted on circumstantial evidence.
Right.
And this is a good thing because we don't want innocent people going to jail because they were in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's a reason why circumstantial evidence does not quite meet the threshold of without a reasonable doubt.
Right.
However, we're not in a court. We're just two guys talking about something that we see as suspicious.
Right.
And when we're not talking about one piece. I mean, when you have a mountain of circumstantial of things that just don't add up.
Don't pay any attention to that mountain over there.
I mean, when that happens, then you just can't help but think that, well, surely, and of course, what else can we do? But we're sitting back thinking, well, surely we're going to hear in the news here in a day or so. Surely they're going to update the story. They're going to say, oh, well, here, but we did find this, we do have this hard drive, and here's the plans, and it turns out he was insane about X, Y, and Z, or he was a proponent of X group. They
did say that they found proof that he was planning to do this in other places as well.
See, I mean, that in of itself was he planning to do it in other places after this?
He was planning on doing it in other concerts. I saw something about that.
Well, I guess the question about that is that was he planning to do it
before or after this?
Well, because to me, in my mind, clearly the man is insane. He's mentally ill, disturbed in some way. But if you have enough logic and reason left in your mind to carry out such an event, you have to also know this is a one-way ticket.
Yeah.
You're not going up there, raining down that fire, and then just walking out of the hotel and driving
pulling it off somewhere down the road.
That's not going to that's not going to happen. Yeah. I mean, so And even with that, once again, I just can't help but think, and I just can't help but say that when we're short on details, and when the narrative continues to change, and then when too many questions start to get asked, then the story's old news, and it's out of the cycle, and no one's talking about it anymore.
Right.
That will just leave people with this lingering distrust and this lingering unknown, and that's not good. I mean, it's and like I already mentioned, I'm not necessarily saying that anyone should be forced to make statements to the public. I'm not necessarily saying that it's everyone's right to just walk into the investigation room and read all the evidence, because that would take forever and all that. I'm just saying that there has to be some conclusion to this story.
Right.
Because as far as I'm concerned, the story has not concluded.
Right. But according to public at large, it's forgotten.
It's forgotten.
And that's your conclusion?
Yeah.
I don't know.
So
what about Texas?
So then, just to keep piling on the hate, this past Sunday, and boy, isn't it nice to be talking about something that happened recently as opposed to something that happened months ago.
Right.
But I wish it were good news.
Yeah.
But this past Sunday in the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, a gentleman, and I'll say his name once, and that'll be the last time we do it. His name is Devin Kelly. Showed up at the church during service. It's a small conservative church in Texas. Shocker there, it's a conservative church in Texas.
Yeah.
He walks in, opens fire on the congregation.
Dressed in fatigues.
With
a bulletproof vest.
He's got a vest. He's got his AR. And what are the numbers? What was it? 26?
26.
26 are dead.
26 are dead.
And and sad too that that's not the biggest. Not only is that not the biggest mass shooting in modern history, that's not even the biggest mass shooting this year.
No.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, here in Tennessee, just a few weeks before that, we had a mass shooting here that took place in Tennessee, where one person was killed and several people were injured.
Yeah.
It's insignificant on the scale of things, but still, it's a lot of the same thing. It's the mental health.
Well, you also had the truck attack in New York.
And the truck attack, right? And they got him, by the way.
They got him.
We're yet to hear what his excuse is.
So this past Sunday, you had the shooting in Sutherland Springs, and the article that I brought up that is from Zero Hedge. The reason why I just brought up this article in particular was this article is talking about the gentlemen that really put themselves in harm's way to go after the shooter. So there's two different gentlemen. Scroll down here so that I remember their names. The sheriff there is Joe Tackett, but the shooting was well underway and there were no authorities nearby.
Right.
This shooting did not cease because of the police. That was not the case. The shooting stopped when it did because private citizens, a private citizen showed up with their own firearm and exchanged fire with the suspect, and then another citizen helped that person chase the suspect away from the scene.
Right.
So Stephen Wilford is a plumber, older gentleman who is a member of that community. He's the guy that showed up to the church. He lives like a block away. You can hear the commotion. Guns are loud.
Oh yeah.
And he grabbed his rifle and he went to go investigate.
So is that his picture right there?
Yeah, that's his picture right there.
Okay.
And by and large, he's been sort of kind of away from the media, which not only did he do something incredibly brave, and we'll talk about it in a little bit more detail, but then on top of that, he's incredibly humble. He's not seeking the limelight in any way. But the reason why I'm still scrolling, because I want to find the other name here, Johnny Langendorf.
The guy in the truck.
Yeah, he was the guy in the truck.
Interviews. Yeah.
So, So scrolling back up here to the picture. So Stephen Wilford, he grabs his gun, his rifle. He goes on foot down to the church, where he sees the shooter coming out the front of the church. Maybe he's reloading. I mean, maybe he's going to grab another. I don't know. We don't know at this point. But, the shootings that have already happened, such as they are, and he sees this, and they immediately exchange fire. And from what I'm understanding, I don't know if he hit him multiple times, but most of them were hitting the vest. But we do know one shot went through the side.
We know that it was enough for the shooter to consider himself done for.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's able to hit the shooter. At least one shot goes in between, through the side, in between his vest. And then the shooter is able to then get to his car, and he speeds off.
Yeah.
And that's when Mr. Wilford reaches Johnny Langendorf, who's passing by in his pickup, and he actually did a really good interview with his local news where he was just saying he came upon this, and he sees Wilford running up to his truck barefoot with a rifle and just quickly says, "That guy shot up the church. We have to go chase that guy." He says, "Okay,
let's do this."
And so first of all,
that's American hero. You got to be ready, and you never know when, kind of a thing there. And
So Wilford jumps into the trunk with Langendorf. They're speeding down the street. They claim that they're going as high as 95 miles an hour, weaving through traffic.
Yeah.
Eventually, the chase stops, and these are the private citizens making chase. The police are not making the chase, but they were corresponding with police dispatch. By the way, so it's not like they were just joyriding down the street. Yeah. Finally, the suspect, I guess due to his injuries, he careens off the road, and then they find him dead.
And they said, and I read somewhere, that the suspect had called his own father and told his father while he was running in the car from these two guys that he wasn't going to make it.
See, I hadn't heard about any calls that honestly, I haven't heard a whole lot. I've heard some different conjecture and some stories about, his social media presence and things, and we can talk about that a little bit here in a second. I hadn't heard a lot about the shooter. One thing I am confused about, because I've heard it both ways, did he ultimately succumb to his injury, or did he also die of a self-inflicted gunshot wound?
The official report that the police came out with was that he had died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and that he had taken his life in the vehicle either prior to the accident or after. I'm not really sure.
So the best we know right now is that he swerves off the road. He probably can. He can no longer control the vehicle from his previously sustained injury.
Or because he shot himself while he was driving.
And but either way, then he shoots himself.
Once again, we don't get any answers. We have a dead guy.
Yeah. So once again, the man is dead.
Yeah.
And and it's easy for us to say, well, good riddance to him.
We're left with why.
Yeah, exactly. And
why?
And look, I'm not saying I don't believe that. Look, if someone says and good riddance to him, he's a monster. Look, you're right.
Yeah.
I'm not in any way condoning or defending him. He is a monster, and I'm glad he's dead. But what I hate about it is that all we're left with now, other than this death and despair, is questions. That's what it always seems to be.
We don't learn anything because we have nothing to go from. Why did you do this? What was the reason behind this?
He's a 26-year-old guy, so he's a young man. Mm-hmm. He's a young man who's got this firearm. We have heard a little bit about him. So it turned out
that there was a domestic dispute at the church involving him somehow.
Yeah, so he has to put it lightly, with what evidence we know now, or the facts we know. So we do know that there's a history of domestic violence with this man.
Right.
So the man has got issues.
Sure.
Okay, and he's a young man. Mm-hmm. And then he was in the military, he was in the Air Force, and he was discharged. He was dishonorably discharged.
Right.
And he didn't get any prison time either. Yeah. We'll talk about that other one later. Yeah. So he's dishonorably discharged from the Air Force, and he has domestic violence on a rap sheet.
Right, and that's why he was domestically. That was why he was discharged.
Which, by the way, it's worth mentioning on the outset before we really get into the weeds of the philosophical issues. That also means that legally he was not supposed to be in possession of the firearm he was in possession of.
Exactly.
But he was, because criminals break laws. I hate to break that to you. But so once again, this is much more fresh, and this is still really in the media. Yeah. And I know hopefully there'll still be more that'll come out about it. This one does seem a bit more, it seems more cut and dry into this is what happened and this is how it concluded.
Yep.
we know that. I feel
Yeah.
confident that we
Right.
know that.
Yeah.
But we don't know him, and we don't know why he did what he did.
Right.
And we talked before the show where I had made the comment to you that I understand that when people are upset and they're angry and they're frustrated and they're confused, that people can say it doesn't matter why he did what he did. He's a monster and he's dead, and we're glad he's gone.
Yeah.
But it does matter.
It does.
It does matter. I know I had used the analogy of if you shoot somebody, but it's in self-defense, obviously the reason matters. That's not prevalent to this particular case, but
Right.
we still we want to know because we want to understand how these things happen, how these things come to be, why they happen,
and how we can prevent them.
how
in the
we
future.
can prevent them in the future.
Sure.
So what else can we do now but to ask questions? I mean, it's
Right.
And I would even go so far as to say I feel like for some people, maybe some people, for their way to cope with these types of things is to try to understand.
Yeah.
Is to try to understand why. We don't know a lot about him outside of his domestic background and his military background, which is not good. I've heard some different reports online that he was what I would refer to as a leftist, a socialist type of a guy back politically. I had seen some different reports that were saying that he had a social media presence like Facebook, where he had claimed that he wanted to cause trouble.
Well, I also read in Facebook, a big article I saw on Facebook. I wish I had that to reference. Where on his own Facebook page, he professed to be a very dominant atheist, very much against Christianity in specific terms.
And I keep on using the phrase "I've seen reports" just because I don't want to hang my hat on any one of these things until we've seen it in black and white, straight from the horse's mouth.
And
so
we'll
to
be
speak.
working in the future on making sure that
we'll
articles that we reference are shown to you, so you know what we're talking
but
about.
I've heard people say that he was a militant type. I've heard people say that was his sort of political and philosophical background. I've even heard reports saying that he showed what was he saying and doing at the church. I've seen some people saying,
why that church?
Yeah, why that church? Why that day? Why those people? Did he have any plan afterward? Did he think he was getting away?
Yeah.
I mean, was that it for
Yeah.
him? Did he say anything at the church? I had seen some reports that said that he was yelling some leftist ideology, like socialist type, communistic type things. And that he had some of those types of things in social media, but even that being neither here nor there, because I'm a libertarian. I'm certainly no fan of leftism. I'm certainly no fan of socialism.
Right.
And the people that practice those ideologies, I think, are harmful and dangerous. But I still would like to think that someone can have a philosophical opinion different than mine and not feel the need to kill me and my family.
Yeah. So this boils down to two things for me. It boils down to mental health, and it boils down to the whole gun control issue again. And here we go. I said it. I said the word.
Yeah.
Here we go. Take a flash picture, okay?
Yeah.
Yes. Now,
so for the rest of this episode, those are the events as we have them right now. There's still more questions. Maybe we can do an update on these if we get more answers down the road. But what this really spurs is there's two topics to discuss, because no amount of discussion that we have will bring any of those people back.
right.
They're gone.
Yeah.
But we don't want these things to continue to happen. We want to be in a place in our country and in our culture where we don't have to expect these breaking headlines every week.
Yeah.
And so we want to spend the rest of the episode talking about two things. We want to talk about guns, and we want to talk about mental health.
Right.
And I want to talk about guns first and then talk about mental health, because I think guns is the red herring and mental health is the problem.
Right.
But let's
agree.
discuss guns first,
Sure.
because we talked about this a little bit before the show as well. So, first of all, we have a Second Amendment to our Constitution. The Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms, was not written by our founding generation so that private citizens would have the armament necessary to hunt deer. That is not correct. The Second Amendment was there so that the private citizens had the armament to fight tyrants, whether they are at home or abroad.
Right.
This is a generation that just got done fighting right amongst their own homes against tyrants, and they fully understood the difficulties in that and the pain in that, and they fully understood that it could happen again. And so they felt like the first line or last line of defense against tyranny was for an armed population.
Right.
We're not going to get into the semantics of well-armed militia and bearing arms and what that. I'm not going to have that conversation with anyone because I can tell you what that means. What that means is that the people have the right to self-defense, and that right extends to defending themselves against tyranny at home and abroad. That means their own government or foreign governments.
Exactly.
And that means being armed in whatever means necessary to fight that force, to meet force with force.
Right.
And I know I know that the people who love the logical fallacy out there will say, well, does that mean everybody should be able to have a tank and have your recreational McNuke, as the libertarian community would say, and everything else? And frankly, yeah, I'm going to tell you, I don't care. I think people should be able to have whatever they can afford to have. Yeah. I do genuinely mean that. Yeah. And I know that for some people, just like in our last episode where we were talking about anarcho-capitalism and what anarchy means, and how you're like, well, that you're getting so far down that road that now all of a sudden I'm uncomfortable. I know sometimes people get uncomfortable when it comes to the gun debate, but make no mistake about it, it's to defend yourself from tyrants. Yeah. It's not to defend yourself from a mugger, although you can.
Right.
It's not to kill a deer, although you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes in some places, it's to kill tyrants.
Right.
Period. Full stop.
Right. Which means the government.
Yeah, which means the government. So that shall not be infringed.
Right.
So on a constitutional level, there's no point in even having a gun debate because it's unconstitutional.
Right.
On a moral level, since people are free and a big part of freedom is self-determination and self-defense,
right,
and the liberty to maintain the ability to defend oneself under any and all circumstances, it's not a conversation. There's just no conversation there. That's not a conversation to be had. So then the next conversation as it pertains to guns is that, well, if we can't infringe on guns and guns are there for people for self-defense, then, well, what about gun laws that we have? What about bad people? I think you had mentioned, well,
sure,
we've got to have some sort of conversation about bad guys getting guns, stopping bad guys from getting guns.
Right.
And I know, and I know that I said to you that, well, the laws that we have now didn't work because he got the gun and did what he did. And you had the reports of, the Air Force didn't properly file his history, and he should have been ineligible to get the gun, but he got it and all that. And people talk about gun show loopholes and all these different things.
Right.
The takeaway from that shouldn't be that therefore we need stricter laws. Right. The takeaway from that should be if man A wants something and man B can sell it to him, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Hence the black market, like what you were saying.
I had made the analogy to you before the show that if you think that passing 50 more laws, there's just a certain amount of laws that if we can just pass a certain amount of regulation, then at that point the right people will get what they need and the wrong people won't. If you think in your world that that's possible, man, you must be so glad no one has any weed. Man, God, it's so good that we got rid of all that weed. No one can get it anywhere.
True.
God.
That's true.
And I'm not even talking about states that have legalized, although I'm all for ending the war on drugs. I mean, we're in Tennessee. You still can't have recreational weed in Tennessee. I don't think we'd have to go very far down the sidewalk to find people that either have it or smoked it recently or know where you can get some.
Yeah.
The point being is prohibition doesn't work.
Right.
So why, in a world where we know that prohibition doesn't work and you know that black markets will spring up because if there's a demand, it will be met.
Right.
Why do you think that, if we can just pass a little bit more legislation, then no bad people will ever get guns? That's not realistic.
Exactly.
And so what I would say to people who are unsure on this or who are waffling that say, well, I'm pro Second Amendment, but I don't really know about what they refer to as assault rifles, which is just terminology. It's
right.
Whether you're talking about full auto versus semi-automatic or silencers or bump stocks or whatever the boogeyman Second Amendment debate of the day is.
Right.
If you don't really know where you fall down on that, or you are firmly against it and you think I'm crazy, I guess what I would say to you is that, well, for one, there's no legal argument, there's no moral argument, and at the end of the day, if you truly want these types of events to stop happening, then you'll want to figure out why they happen and figure out a way to prevent those things from happening.
Right.
And if we already know we can't prevent guns from getting into the hands of the wrong people, anyone who's seen any of the crime statistics in Chicago can tell you that with all of their laws and all of their anti-gun legislation, all the gangbangers are down there shooting left and right every single weekend. So obviously legislation on guns doesn't work, nor is it legal or moral in my opinion.
Yeah.
Therefore, if you truly didn't want to see incidents like this happening, then you would be working with me to figure out ways to make them more rare or non-existent and not be playing politics and going after the gun boogeyman, which clearly does not work.
Exactly.
If you genuinely care to, because emotion, that's how people argue, especially people on the left side, but right side as well. People like to argue from emotion that, well, don't you feel bad for these people and aren't you sorry that they're dead and how can you disrespect them Of course we do. Someone who's not a sociopath, of course they feel that way. But what we're saying is that your proposed fixes don't work. There's tons of evidence that shows it doesn't work, and it's just flat out immoral in the first place. So why don't we work together to find something that not only doesn't trample the Constitution and individual liberty, but also actually addresses the problem?
Right. So then let's look at these incidents.
So then we kind of transition to the second part is. As I mentioned to you, there's a really great quote by Joe Rogan that he had said on the Joe Rogan podcast a while back. And this would have been back like with Sandy Hook or an event that happened some years ago now. And he said that we have a mental health problem in this country disguised as a gun problem.
Right.
It's so easy for the NRA and anti-gun groups and the left and right to argue about guns. That for one, nothing's changing.
Yeah.
Two, we're still having events like this happen more and more frequently.
Right.
And three, we're still not addressing what we both agree on this is a major issue, and that's a mental health crisis in the United States.
Right.
I would even go a step forward, and I would say, if you were to ask me, Alan, what do you think are the two biggest issues for why these events are happening, or what we need to address? Knowing that for me, gun is off the table because it's not guns. Guns don't kill people. People kill people.
Right.
I would say it's two things. One, we have a very serious mental health crisis in this country. And two, we have a serious culture problem in this country where, in my opinion, the value for human life seems to be at an all-time low.
Yeah.
And it's easy for a tragedy like one of these to happen and to say that, well, look at all the outpouring of sadness and anger. Of course people value human life. I'm not saying that people at large don't value human life in some sense, but there absolutely are elements that certainly do not have the same value for human life. And I think society as a whole has eroded a bit. Just on the overall arcing of our culture, it seems that the value of life has taken a few steps down. Yeah. It may still be higher than not, but I would argue it's gone down a bit.
I agree.
And with it going down a bit, combined with a mental health crisis, so you have this perfect storm of there's no way you're going to get guns off the street. So you have a guy that has a mental health issue who, for whatever the reasoning or insanity may be, he has convinced himself that people X are my foes.
Yeah.
And I must hurt them. And so now that in his warped worldview, he believes this to be true, he then goes and finds an instrument of the greatest destruction he can get his hands on, which is not hard to acquire.
Right.
But
it doesn't necessarily have to be a gun per se. It can be a truck.
It can be a truck from Home Depot, as we found recently.
Mm-hmm.
Don't sue us. It could be a truck from anywhere.
Yeah.
And that's happened a lot in Europe as well. There's been multiple like rammings of vehicles in Europe and things where guns are way lower, in importance they are in the United States. But the point being is that if a disturbed individual whose mental health is not properly addressed, who reaches a point where his value for human life is at nil, and he sees some of his neighbors as enemies, he will then find the greatest instrument of destruction that he can find and then commit that cold-bloodedly because he doesn't see himself as killers don't see themselves killing innocent people.
In fact, they believe they are justified in what they're doing.
They're justified in what they're doing, or it's the mugger shoots the guy. He didn't mean to shoot the guy. He just wanted the wallet. The guy fought back. He shot him. And that there's the difference between premeditated versus spur of the moment. But when someone plans over time a premeditated event to gun down a crowd of people, whether it be at a concert or at a church or anywhere else, that is very logically planned. That's very well reasoned.
Right.
It's kind of hard to pull something like that off so expertly without some planning.
Right.
And so in these events, mental health doesn't mean raving lunatic.
Yeah.
And that's when I say we have a mental health crisis, we need to get to a point in our country where we can discuss mental health. And when someone says, I have a mental health problem, that doesn't mean they're the Joker.
Right.
From Batman.
The stigma doesn't fall on them that they're somehow an outcast and that we need to put them in a padded room.
It's not padded room, straight jacket. They're screaming all day and being sedated at night.
Right.
Maybe.
Yeah.
But there's lots of different levels of mental health issues, and I don't mind saying that I'm someone who has battled depression, and at an earlier time in life, I didn't know what that was or what it meant. I've been dealing with depression for a number of years now. I'm 32. I first started having issues with depression probably towards into high school, start of college, so 18, 19. Yeah. So 12, 14 years, somewhere in that area. I didn't know what that was then.
Right.
I just thought I couldn't sleep well. Just thought I just kind of don't feel good. Kind of don't really feel like doing anything. Kind of, not really feeling like going out and hanging out. No, maybe I'm just a homer. Maybe I'm just and the point being is that if and that never manifests itself for me, I never felt the need to harm myself or others. Right. I can say that I have. We all, you've heard the phrase that everyone's fighting their own battles. And I think that's a really apt phrase. And when it's said, it's usually meant emotionally. It's usually meant that, maybe that person's got a family member who's ill, or this person was recently, everyone's got issues in their life. But a mental health issue is an issue in your life that you're battling that, and everyone battles it in their own way. But I think what would help a great deal is we have to get over the stigma that we can't discuss these things and not immediately be judged or ostracized.
Exactly.
One of the main reasons why I know that some people have a hard time discussing it is because they'll then know it's like telling that deep dark secret that once it's out, you can't get it back.
Yeah.
So now that people know this thing about you, they can't unknow it. and you're worried that now they see you that way.
Yeah, and now you're forever somehow like you have a scarlet letter on you.
Yes,
that guy's the crazy guy. That's the one that has depression, or that's the one that has this issue.
Or you think to yourself that, well, Alan's got that problem, so let's not invite Alan out this weekend because he's got something going on. Let's just leave him alone. Well, first of all, that's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah, because all that does is allow that mental issue within that person to stew to get worse.
So what are things that we can do? Because there's not a lot any one person can do, but what can we do in our own communities, in our own families, our friends, our family, our culture, our society? What can we do? Is, for one, if you yourself are experiencing issues, if you feel off, if you feel something is the matter, you have to feel like you can speak of it.
Yeah.
That you don't have to fight your battle. I mean, you've heard the phrase, you don't have to fight your battles alone. If say you have a death in the family, you don't have to go home and stew on. You can speak about the dead. You can share that time with friends and loved ones. Everyone would by and large agree and accept that.
Yeah.
But somehow we don't quite accept it when it comes to this person has a mental health issue. Yeah. All of a sudden that becomes, well, you need to go talk to somebody about that.
Yeah.
What a terrible attitude to have. Right. So first thing is we have to get over this stigma that mental health means broken, crazy person, because all that does is breed the environment of it doesn't get discussed. We have to be able to openly have open dialogue, openly discuss mental health issues in this country. The second thing is in the process of discussing it, we have to bring it to the forefront in such a way that when people share that with one another, you share it with one another in the same way that you would say, "Oh, I had the flu," "Oh, I stubbed my toe." It needs to become. I hate that mental health issues are commonplace. And I, look, guys, I haven't done the research. I haven't funded the studies to look at mental health research and the occurrences of mental health issues, number of people affected in decades past versus now, with the controls of maybe it's more diagnosed now, maybe, and then the controls for medication versus therapy and different things. I don't want to get into that. I know we could get way down the rabbit hole with some people when you talk about antidepressants and psychotropic drugs and different things. Right. And sometimes when you see events like mass shootings, people start wondering, well, was he on any pills? What was he taking? That sort of thing. I don't want to go there. I really don't want to go there. I kind of want to make a more broad stroke that just realizing that we have a mental health crisis. We need to be able to discuss it. And as a libertarian, as someone who believes in the market and doesn't believe in big government, is being able to tell someone who's making an emotional argument, your great aunt on Facebook who says they ought to pass a law about X, Y, and Z, is to say, laws are not the answer.
Right.
You can't legislate morality. You can't. If you could, we could have a unanimous vote today to pass a law to say, okay, no one ever kill anybody ever again, and no one ever have problems in your mind. Boy, fix that. Done and done. Let's move on to fixing the economy. It doesn't work that way.
Let me kind of preface a few things like this. With mental health, not just the stigma that people give somebody who has a mental issue, or somebody that's dealing with depression or so on, that being afraid to communicate that one with their loved ones or their friends. But there's also, on the receiving end of that, when someone does come forward, be receptive, be open, be willing to talk to that person, even if you don't quite understand why or the causes. Sometimes just listening and loving them and helping them to understand at least that you are listening, goes a long way to helping people who have those issues to begin a little bit of a healing and begin to understand that, like, see, I think one of the biggest problems with people with mental health is they are afraid to communicate their feelings. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're very obvious to communicate their feelings, and because the feelings they communicate can be a little bit unnerving to people who don't have mental problems. They shun them. And it's like, but sometimes those people need an ear. They need to be listened to. They need to be heard, and they need to be accepted, because what happens is this energy, this negative thing, this mental problem they face builds inside them to the point where it explodes. And I think that some cases, not all of them, but maybe some of these mass shootings have to do with the fact that these people did not get the help and they didn't get the love that they needed.
Well, that kind of transitions to the thing I said about culture. Is that if you have a culture of tolerance and acceptance, and we're all for that, but if you also have a culture that firmly is committed to anti-violence, that rejects violence in all of its forms, including when you see a troubled young person who is going down a path that you find troublesome, and they start to make aggressive statements and suggesting that, violence towards. I'm reminded of all the stuff recently about punching a Nazi.
Yeah.
And people were saying, there are a lot of. I reject that because it's wrong to initiate aggression on other people. Full stop. That's what the non-aggression principle means. Right. I'm seriously concerned that we have a growing number of people in our society, in the American culture, that genuinely don't agree with what I just said. That genuinely think that, but they're a bad person, and if they had their way, things would be bad. So it's okay to punch them. No. Violence should be rejected in all of its forms. Only in self-defense is, and that's not aggression, that's self-defense. That's why I say violence is rejected in all of its forms. I genuinely believe if we had a culture where everyone rejected violence, and if we had a culture that had just the utmost, on a scale of 1 to 10 for human life, along with more education and acceptance and removing the stigma of mental illness, then you would see a lot more change in violence in the United States than you would ever see from any legislation.
That would be one of the largest changes that we could experience.
And on the one hand,
just being open to what's going on in the lives of others and being receptive of that and not making them feel like there's something wrong with them.
And you know what's kind of funny is some people would say, well, that's what Alan, what you just said, that's a lot. That's hard to do. And it would just be easier if we could just pass a law. It's that, well, if you've seen Congress lately, it's hard to get laws passed nowadays because there's
you can't pass laws against mental health people.
Yeah. So I feel like in kind of wrapping this episode up, because it was a somber episode, and I wanted to save these topics just for their own talk. I think the summary here is that, I believe in the principles of liberty, and I believe that gun ownership and by extension self-defense is an inalienable right. It's a right endowed to you by your Creator. And if you believe that, and if you believe that your rights are natural rights and they're not given to you by the state, the state can only take things away. They can't, because you have it as a human being in your being, you possess those rights. Then they cannot be infringed upon. And so if you believe that, and on a practical level, you see that gun legislation simply just doesn't work, because in places where gun legislation is the tightest, you still have lots of gun violence, then we have to agree. If we're going to agree to disagree on gun laws, then we at least have to agree that, well, let's put our efforts and our energy into something different, into something new, into something that we haven't maybe tried enough or at all to try to make these events less and less frequent. And I believe that we agree here on this show that addressing mental health and addressing a culture of violence and value of human life is going to go a lot further in preventing people who are dealing with personal issues to become people who become dangerous to society.
Right. I agree.
Yeah.
Very good.
That's a deep episode.
That is a deep episode. That's really deep. So
I hope we don't have to have another one of these episodes, like
No, I hope
addressing
so.
these topics. I hope that's it. We're
but
done.
something tells me that we will.
Yeah.
You know, and that's just the way that it is. I mean, that's the thing. So, in closing, you know, tell us about the website,
Yep.
about the Facebook page, about things like that.
We're
Get a hold
working.
of us.
We're working on the website. In the meantime, you can find us on our Facebook group, facebook.com/TGS Alan Mosley, and you'll see that on the screen as well. We're already about up to 1,500, going on 2,000
Yeah.
likes in such a short span of time,
That's amazing.
which is really
Thank
weird.
you, by the way. Thank you all.
You people should find better things to go. I don't know. Our episodes come out on YouTube coming soon. They'll be on a variety of different platforms. If you want to support the show, and gosh, who doesn't want to support the show?
Right.
You can find us on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/TGS Alan Mosley. So really just type in TGS Alan Mosley as an extension on every website and you'll find the gold standard.
Absolutely. Well, thank you guys once again for being a part of it, and we'll see you next time.
Catch us next week.